Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The drama at Red Bull does not appear to be over just yet. Yes, Christian Horner has now been sacked in favour of Laurent Mekies, but that does not mean that that's the only change that we are going to see in the organisation over the next few months. Horner was removed as a director from all of the Red Bull related companies, but Mekies has not been put in officially as his replacement. Many theories emerging today as to why that might be, whether there are other changes that the guys in Austria are cooking up to potentially keep Max Verstappen even happier than he might already be. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Now, starting here real quick, we talked the other day about the return of Sepang, the Malaysian Grand Prix, and we talked about the figure that Formula 1 want on an annual basis to run that Grand Prix is roughly 70 million euros. Some countries and jurisdictions can pay that, others can't. And when there's more demand than supply of Grand Prix, and there are more, let's say, countries and jurisdictions that want a race that are able to have one, that number is going to go up. It is just economics, but it means that we're not going to get a Malaysian Grand Prix, because actually the top dog over there, Hannah Yo, she said that it's just too much, because we could spend that amount of money on funding 10,000 Malaysian athletes from a sports commission perspective. It just doesn't make any sense for him to put that money into Formula 1. Understandably so, but it means that a return to F1 or of F1 to Sepang is not going to be happening anytime soon. There's also an interesting development on potentially a 12th Formula 1 team. So we have an 11th, Cadillac are officially coming in next year. There has been talk about whether there could be other teams interested as well. There was talk about a high-tech entry, but high-tech are in a bit of drama right now because of the situation with Ollie Oaks' brother. He was the top dog, team principal for a time at Alpine, then he stepped down in kind of mysterious circumstances while his brother was potentially arrested for smuggling in some money. There was talk about Dmitry Mazepin. There's been a lot going on, but the bottom line is the 11th team has been accepted, so people are scrambling to say, well, hang on a second, the 11th team is in, why can't we make a team as well? You look at the valuations of these Formula 1 teams, it seems pretty sensible right now to try and get in. There's been talk about Hyundai as well. Now, Caterham, they went bankrupt in like 2014 or whatever it was, and apparently they might be back under new ownership and under a new name, SKM Racing. So there's a Kuwaiti investor, Saad Kassis Mohammed, who's only 24. I tried to look into his background. I couldn't really find that much on his family and everything. I found that he was like a polo player. You know, not water polo, right? Polo when you're on the back of a horse, and he went to Oxford. So, you know, presumably he's relatively well connected. But for his fund to have 280 million euros a year to pump into a racing team is quite something. And is this going to happen? I'm putting the chances at about 5%, but just something to keep in mind that there is money interested in bringing back other Formula 1 projects. Could it be effectively Caterham revived under a new entry? I don't know. I find it kind of unlikely, but apparently he's assembled a team for the project and has got some top people in various departments. But whether it's actually going to happen remains pretty doubtful to me. Let's talk about the driver stuff, and this is going to get into what we're going to discuss with Red Bull in a second. Loads of theories about what Cadillac are going to do. Is it going to be Perez, Bottas? There's been lots of talk. You guys have been making your thoughts clear as well in the comments. You know, while Bottas and Perez may be sensible options, I think there is a part of the F1 fandom that would prefer them to give a younger driver a chance, because it would be more exciting for us, really. We know that Perez and Bottas, you know, they've not got world championships in their future. They might be very solid, respectable drivers, and they could be the perfect fits for Cadillac in many ways. But it's not like throwing an Alex Dunn in the car and seeing what happens on track, because, you know, those are things that are probably more exciting to the general fan base, but I still think it'd be nice to see these guys back in the sport, and it might be sensible. Rumour has it Bottas has signed. Now, Perez is expected to also sign and get announced at the Italian Grand Prix. But the rumour has it that actually Bottas has signed the contract first, and they reached terms and agreed a deal earlier than they did with Perez. When might they announce Bottas? I don't know, but rumour has it that they will at some point. Now, yesterday we talked about this. In Abu Dhabi 2024, Bottas' last ever race at the time, before stepping into a reserve role, as we know, this year at Mercedes, helping Antonelli's development, he got into a bit of a kerfuffle with Kevin Magnussen. Not the only drama that Magnussen was involved in that season, but he had the heavy lockup. down into the left-right chicane, and he got a 5-place penalty because he got a big penalty and it would have been like a drive-through or whatever because the race ended. So he got a 5-place grid penalty for the next race that he would race at. But of course, he didn't turn up to Australia this year to race. And as a result, we thought that would carry over in the same way that Button, whatever it was back in Monaco, all those years ago, got a penalty that wasn't served in his final race. So the theory goes that, well, when you come back, you've got to serve it, however many years that is down the line. And as a result, there was lots of discussion that that was exactly what was going to happen here. But according to sources today, that's no longer going to be a thing. The FIA have actually changed the rules. Whether you think this is fair or reasonable, definitely intrigue to your thoughts in the comments below. But there is a rule now where if a 12-month window has expired after the grid penalty is applied, then it simply expires. So because it's going to be over 12 months between Bottas's final race getting the penalty and returning to the grid, the penalty simply ceases to exist, which I guess is probably reasonable, I guess, but it's still kind of interesting. I think it does make sense in the way that if you're Cadillac and you're signing a driver, do you really want to think that in his first race back he's going to have to start probably at the back of the grid depending on the car? It's not really an ideal way for it to go, but yeah, that's the rule. Whether you think that's a good or a bad rule is certainly open for interpretation. But let's talk about the driver market elsewhere. AMUS are reporting, this isn't from AMUS, but Soy Motor here mentioned in the article that AMUS are discussing Franco Colapinto and are seemingly convinced that Colapinto is not going to be driving an Alpine in 2026. I thought there was a good chance that he might get ousted mid-season. I mean, we know what Briatore could do. Doohan was in, Colapinto was in. Who knows who else they could put in? Doohan back in, Paul Aron in the car. There's some other options, but doubtful given the contracts that they may have signed with sponsors and the like to keep Colapinto at Alpine for the time being. But apparently next year it's just not going to happen. Now, AMUS say that in the next 10 rounds he has the option to change the mind of the team. And to be fair, it's not like there are so many clear-cut elsewhere options. Sonoda could be interesting. I think that's one to keep an eye on if Red Bull do not decide to move forward, as we'll discuss in a second. Perez or Bottas could be options as well. If one of those doesn't go to Cadillac and they get Dragovic or Mick Schumacher or somebody else, then maybe one of those could replace Colapinto. I think Perez would make some sense in terms of the commercial appeal as well that Alpine might be interested in. Of course, Bottas has the relationship, though, with Mercedes, and Alpine are going to be Mercedes-powered. So there's a few interesting and moving pieces right now, but the general theory goes that Colapinto is not going to be on the grid any longer next season. There was a bit of a debate between Ferrari and Mercedes over Lewis Hamilton's current predicament. He's obviously had a difficult couple of rounds before the summer break, and Vasseur says that McLaren was Mercedes, then he went to Mercedes, obviously, an English team, and we underestimated the challenge that it would be moving him into the Ferrari situation. Mercedes and Toto Wolff even said, and look, there is some logic to suggest this, that Hamilton's driving style just doesn't mesh so well with these current iteration of cars. That's what I think it was even Andrew Chauvelin had to say. He made some comments that, this whole generation of car doesn't suit his style. He's been working on how he drives, particularly struggling over a single lap, but the long run pace is always there. It's just more the way that he wants to attack the corner, and when you do that, the car would snap to oversteer. The way that Hamilton would brake super late, send the car in, drive at or slightly over the limit, used to work back in the day. And maybe at 40, the ability to adapt his driving style, especially when you're talking about the final tenths of a second, has been a challenge for him in this era of regulations. And we hear the McLaren drivers talk about this a lot. You can't drive these ground effect cars at 100%. You have to drive them at 95, 98%, even in qualifying, to get the best out of them. Because if you unsettle the car too much, you spike the tyre temperatures, because those are the tyres that Pirelli have designed. And if you unsettle the car too much, you start to lose downforce because of the way the floor operates. So there's probably a few things that maybe make this add up. Certainly it's Mercedes' opinion that Hamilton was stronger in the previous generation, not just because, whether they think he's declined individually or not. There is a sense of Hamilton struggling to adapt to these cars. Now, the going theory is that next year that will be reversed to a great extent. The cars will not be so reliant on being so stiff in the suspension, running so close to the ground. There will be more play and leeway there. They should be more nimble, more agile to some degree. They're going to be smaller. they're going to be, thinner in some regard, right? So it does maybe open the door for Hamilton to have a better time with those cars, but there has been some debate on it, right? Because Fred Vasseur kind of responded and said, well, he doesn't really see it like that. He thinks that if the bouncing was there, maybe he's throwing a little bit of a shot to Mercedes for the bouncing problems they have. But let's not forget, right, in 2022, that Ferrari was also bouncing around like a kangaroo. Just for some reason, it didn't really seem to affect them that much, and they were still able to be very fast. I mean, like Australia 2022, the F175 was all over the shop, and it was still winning the Grand Prix in Charles Leclerc's hands with a Grand Slam. So yeah, Toto says that the ground effect era has affected him. Vasseur says that he's actually just been generally pretty unlucky in recent rounds, so we'll see how that plays out, of course, when we get back from the summer break, which isn't far away. Today's Thursday. On Monday, I mean, a week today is media day, right? So thankfully Formula 1 is back in action. But let's talk Red Bull. They've been a big discussion point this season, because what does Max think about what's going on over there? Is he happy with the way that team is currently trending? Is he happy that Horner was sacked? Is that the reason why, look, at the end of the day, you look at the timeline, Horner gets sacked relatively shortly afterwards. Jos Verstappen's on the grid. Nico Rosberg's asking him, hey, did you have anything to do with that? And he says, I've got nothing to say. And then Max at the same time confirms that yes, he will be coming back with Red Bull next season. And the theory goes that, well, Max was going to stay anyway. It doesn't make sense to leave. It's too much of a risk to leave and join a contract elsewhere, because you don't know if Red Bull are going to get it right next year. You also don't know if the team that you're going to join is going to get it right themselves. So I think it's logical for Max to stay at Red Bull, but it's also very logical for him to be very swiftly out the door if things do not go to plan at the start of 2026. But Horner goes, Verstappen stays. There was a feeling that if Horner stays, that was slightly more problematic. We know that Horner, Jos Verstappen, Helmut Marko, bit of a power struggle, and all the internal things that went down in that team, some of which we know, some of which we don't know over the last couple of years, led to what felt like an inevitability. Horner was, given the circumstances, probably not going to survive for too much longer, but I thought they would at least give him until the end of the season, right? The mid-season sacking was quite surprising and did feel to some degree like okay, we need to do this if we want to keep hold of Max. Now, Max will be there next year. AMUS have done their own prediction on the lineups for 2026, and they predict, based on the way things stands, that Hadjar will get the promotion to Red Bull, that Lawson will stay at Racing Bulls, and that Arvid Lindblad will get the other seat in that team. This also seems like the most compelling argument to me. Now, I think Hadjar still has a fair bit to prove over the final few rounds if this is going to happen. I think the big question for me is it possible for Yuki to do enough? Because I think they want to put Lindblad in the Racing Bull for sure. I think Hadjar has proven that he shouldn't be going anywhere. Like, even if Hadjar has a stinker second half of the season, have a hard time imagining they're going to demote him, right? So then that raises, or like get rid of him entirely. So that raises questions on Lawson, right? But we know that Lawson's done better in recent rounds since the Austria front wing upgrade, I think, that they made on that on the Racing Bull. It's been a little bit better. Some floor tweaks as well, I think they've made over time as well. Hadjar and Lawson have been more competitive with one another. But Lindblad, I'm sure, will be getting that Racing Bull stripe. It's just a very Red Bull thing to do, unless they're fundamentally a different organisation now with Horner gone. But with Helmut Marko still calling the shots to some degree, and maybe more so than ever on the driver's side, given Horner's absence, then I'm expecting this to be almost a guarantee, which means there's only a couple of seats available, Hadjar, Lawson and Yuki. Yuki will never go back to Racing Bulls. It wouldn't make sense, especially because the Honda thing is over. The only question is whether Yuki could do enough to hold on to the Red Bull seat, but he's got Hadjar and Lawson chomping at the bit, and Hadjar would like the Red Bull drive. Look, he may turn up to Australia next year and be out in Q1 and the cycle repeats, but it might make sense for Red Bull to give him a go, because I think Hadjar's been relatively mature given his expectation that he would be pretty fiery. And it's not like he's not fiery, but he does keep that emotion under control relatively well, better than you can argue Tsunoda has done in the past. This, of course, would also leave Yuki to a very uncertain future, but this is the main drama of the day at Red Bull. So a few days ago, about a week ago now, we saw that Horner was officially terminated. So this is on company tout. You can see that Red Bull Racing Limited, that's the company number, termination details, Mr. Christian Horner from Red Bull Racing and from Red Bull Technology Limited. So all the matter of record is there in the public domain who are the directors of this organization. For example, here I can head to Red Bull Racing Limited, I can see the company number, I can look at the people, I can look at the officers, I can look at the persons with significant control, and that's because they're owned by Red Bull Technology Limited. But if we look at the officers, you'll find Dr. Helmut Marko, a number of other names, and well, some of these, of course, as we can see, have resigned. If we scroll down far enough, we'll probably see, I'll just search for it. If I search for Horner, here we go. Yeah, apparently he resigned as director, but of course he was removed on the 13th of August, as we know. So yeah, basically all these guys have resigned and all no longer active. If I go to the second page, you'll see a very similar story as well. So interesting, isn't it? Every single name on this list, apart from Stefan Sulzer, has resigned. So there's only 2 directors that are current. I mean, you can see it here, 40 officers, 38 resignations. So I guess I could filter by current. That would be smart. Dr. Helmut Marko, Stefan Sulzer, those are your 2 directors. So, okay, what's going on? Horner's been removed, but Laurent Mekies has not been added. So this has been noted, and people have their theories as to what may be going on. So Thomas Maher does an article here, and obviously he's out of the team, he's been spotted, he's been removed as a director, and actually he does list out here the individuals in place as the current directors of these respective companies. So why hasn't Mekies been added, right? Now, it actually turns out that he's still listed as a director of Racing Bulls. So, you might think, oh, but that's kind of strange, right? That's probably just a, let's say, administrative thing. They should be removing him there because he's not working for those guys anymore, you would think. So, presumably, that's what they're going to do. But Sulzer's appointment, he's basically makes sense, Salzburg, Austrian side, right? He's the global head of HR at Red Bull, the big main Red Bull company as well. So he's got these other director functions elsewhere. But people are wondering, okay, why isn't Mekies getting this director role officially? Because they mentioned the Racing Bulls thing as well, that he's not been removed yet. But recent lodging of paperwork pertaining to the operations makes it clear that a deliberate decision has been made not to make Mekies a director, at least for now, he says. Now, Horner was not also immediately a director. For the first couple of seasons, he wasn't selected as one, and he was added as a director in 2007. But Sulzer was just added. So they're going back to that kind of old structure where they've got a non-executive director appointed, and then they've got Marko there as well, who also straddles the line. Then Horner was promoted and given that role. So one interpretation is that maybe he's not the long-term man, or it could be that to earn his directorship, Mekies has got to do, some top quality work. Now, there's also a possibility that he's effectively a de facto director, where he's not officially there, but he is effectively still making the top decisions. Sources indicated to Planet F1 recently the decision to remove Horner was largely to recapture some of the ethos the team had when it first arrived in F1, with the focus being on the can, not the man. So the desire to move away from one sole individual effectively running the team. So that's what the rest of the article kind of goes on to describe. So what's going on here at Red Bull, right? They've brought in Mekies. He's not getting a directorship role at Red Bull, unlike Horner, but it took a little bit of time for Horner to get that as well. You could expect that if Mekies was 100% the man for the job, they might just give him that directorship now. The other option is that they don't want to do that because they don't want it to be focused on one single individual, and they want to make the calls from head office in Austria. And Mekies is not exactly a pawn on the front line, but is maybe not too far away from that. And if they were super confident in Mekies, then maybe they would indicate that confidence in some other way. So I wouldn't be surprised, right? I mean, Horner's been at the helm for a very long time. Obviously, it's going to take time for Red Bull to reshape the image of what they want to be. And I think Mekies could be a decent man for the job. But whether the Red Bull top dogs are fully convinced that he's the right man for the gig, that is another very interesting question. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing I wanted to share, which I find actually kind of fascinating, if this is true. And I looked this up, and it does appear to be true, that George Russell has not been driver of the day since Sakir 2020, when he made his, of course, debut with Mercedes. So it's kind of crazy, is it not? That we know that it's kind of it is a popularity contest, right, driver of the day, but it's still kind of remarkable to me that Russell's been a top driver for a long time. and he's not had, and he's won plenty of Grand Prix in that period, but there's always been some reason maybe why the fans have not given him driver of the day. So maybe in Zandvoort, that could change around, but very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.